Okay, so with this idea of it pays to advertise, you want, if you're a plant that's relying on cross-pollination, you should be a little bit flashy. You want to catch the visual attention of your pollinator. And most pollinators have pretty decent eyesight. And so lots of flowers to attract them would be a good idea. And then as we were talking a minute ago, this idea of a longer stalk length to raise the flower up away from all the green foliage, all the leaves. This one. Okay, so scent. So what do you think about scent? So we have, what are some typical pollinators? We have bees, we have hummingbirds, but we have lots of other options. We have beetles, other insects, mammals. So what do you think about scent? Is there a one-size-fits-all answer to that? Probably not. And that's what we see. It really does depend on the pollinator. Some pollinators have a really good sense of smell. Others, at least from what we can tell, don't seem to rely on scent. They don't seem to cue in on that. And so that varies. The answer to that is it varies. It depends on the pollinator, kind of like with the amount of nectar. Like it varies. It depends on the pollinator. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And the number of pollen grains. Again, this is going to depend. How it's usually less pollen if you think about wind pollinated flowers. They usually produce a ton of pollen, and that is a good strategy because if you're relying on wind, that's pretty inefficient. And so having lots of pollen going through the air currents is a good idea. But if you have to evolve with a pollinator, you probably wouldn't be so extravagant with your pollen grains compared to wind pollination. And then again, it depends on the pollinator, how many pollen grains you're going to provide to some extent. So again, especially if that pollinator eats some of the pollen, you again want enough to give them a reward, but not too much. Also, remember that we have our senses, but other animals can do things a little differently. So here is the same flower under visible light on the left and under what we think a bee might see. Bees can see ultraviolet light. And so when they look at that same exact flower, they don't see purple and yellow. They're seeing white with red streaks in the red center. So they think that's a good design to attract the bee because it's almost like a bullseye pattern here, where you're saying here, come right to the middle. And that's where the stigma is, where you're hoping the bee's going to brush the pollen across the stigma, and the reward, the nectar, is usually there. And so again, a very defined pattern to get them honed in on the right part of the flower. Look at these pictures too, same idea. What we would see is on the right, beautiful yellow and orangey yellow. But look how different it looks under what we think a bee would perceive. And so, and again, the darker center, kind of getting that bee to hone in on the center where the stigma is located for pollination and the reward. Very different here. What we see is the top left. What a bee might see is the bottom right. Again, dark center, really getting them to zoom in. Look at that one too. We see the top left. They see a very different image under ultraviolet perception. So very, very interesting differences. We tend to be pretty human-centric when we think about other animals, and we appreciate that they have abilities, senses, and ways of looking and perceiving that can be very different. Still beautiful, either way you look at it, but very interesting targeting patterns. So bees are, when we see the color red on a flower, they're not really perceiving that. Right? So we say they don't perceive red. at least not the way we do. They seem to be attracted to blue or yellow flowers, what we call blue or yellow. But remember, when they look at it under ultraviolet, it will be a little different. And as we saw, there was very distinct markings. There's usually somewhat sturdy platform. So, and if you've ever watched bees fly around, it's amazing they can get off the ground to begin with because they're hefty. And then you need a flower that's not so dainty, so that if they are going to land and crawl around, it won't cause the flower stalk to bend or the flower to break. And yes, they seem to be able to perceive ultraviolet light. And so again, honeybees, incredibly important from a human perspective because so much of what we eat, we rely on them to pollinate those flowers and allow for the fruit production, hopefully, to take place. So roughly a third of our nutrition. And I think that you've probably heard about the issues with honeybee pollen collapse disorder. I'll mention a little bit about that. But here you can see again these flowers, pretty hefty, soft here, these robust flowers, so that as it's crawling around, it's stable, it won't break. Yeah, they really do like to go around to the yellow flowers for sure. Even if you wear, I don't know if you've ever had the occasion, if you wear like a bright yellow shirt or something, they'll come right up to you thinking you're a really giant flower. They usually will move on quite quickly, but here's another one too where it seems like that one is bee pollinated. Here's another design where you can have a nice landing platform for the bee. And again, the stalk is pretty healthy. And the opening is big enough for their rather robust body. You can get in there. And as they're crawling around, they can deposit the pollen. I just put this in here because it's a beautiful picture. Dandelion pollen scattered on the bee. That was entered into a competition. I didn't take the picture, but I thought that was beautiful. So the colony collapse disorder idea is still being studied, and initially they thought one thing, and now they've expanded a little bit on what's going on. Initially, they thought it was the mite idea, the varroa mite. I don't know if you can see that poor bee has a hitchhiker, a mite on its body there. And that's the underside of the insect there. Here you have a close-up of it. Blech. So it is detrimental because it does weaken the bee, and whole hives can be infested with this. So it was easy to see, easy to spot, and so they pointed to that as colony collapse disorder. Well, then there was some inconsistencies in the data they were collecting. Not all the hives necessarily had that. So then they started zooming in on things we can't see, like maybe it's a bacterial pathogen, a fungal pathogen, and they did find fungal spores present on the bees, in the bees. And so here, this data being collected is looking at percentage collected, sampled, I should say. And so then they went, oh, okay, maybe it's fungus. Well, now they're saying it's probably a combination of the mites causing weakening of the bee, as well as fungal pathogens fully adding into that and causing more weakening of the bee's health immune system. And then they're pointing to the idea that the bees don't have the best nutrition, certainly not what they're used to pre-agricultural days, because they are often shipped in big shipping containers and brought to the different agricultural fields and released, and then they go and pollinate, and then they come back, and then they get shipped to the next agricultural field. Well, most of our agricultural fields, looking at conventional agriculture, they're monocultures. It's just acres of corn. acres of wheat, and so this idea that, if you ate a cheeseburger every day in and day out, that's going to cause an impact. And so this idea of monoculturing, and that's what the bees are pretty much forced to eat as they get trucked from field to field. And so they think that's playing a role. And then what we spray on those plants as well, looking at all the pesticides that are being used in agriculture. And the neonicotinoids are thought to be the most damaging. And there's some countries that are banning those. I don't know if we've fully banned them yet. I haven't checked this year's regulatory decisions, but I know that some countries have already banned those. So that class of pesticides. So again, this idea that it's not just one thing, it's probably many things rolled into impacting, harming their nutrition, harming their immune system, and just in general weakening them. And eventually there's a tipping point. And so there's a plea by many, many people that we need to do a better job of making sure our honeybee population is going to be cared for and healthy. I think there's a honeybee or a bee club on campus. Does anyone know about that? I think a faculty in chemistry is the advisor for that club. And so if you're interested in getting involved in that and learning more how to do that, the city of Marquette does allow you to have bees in your backyard. You can have your own beehives back there. They allow that now. And so something to think about. Paul Stamets, who is a fungal guru, everything fungi. He's one of the heavy hitters. He owns his own company out in Washington State called Fungi Perfecti. And he does a lot of collaborative research with faculty at Washington State University. And they're looking at this idea of how do we strengthen the bee population. And his thought is that fungi will help with that. And so they've been testing extracts from fungal mycelia to see if they feed that to the honeybees, if that will strengthen their overall health and immune system. And the short answer is yes, it seems to be working. And so the lengths they go to in order to advertise, they're covered in bees here. But he's been raising money and doing collaborative research, and Give Bees a Chance program is the name of the effort, and his company is Fungi Perfecti. So he is looking at this, and basically they're engineering it kind of looks like a hummingbird feeder, really. And then instead of sugar liquid, a sugar solution, they're putting mycelial extract solution in there. And they have footage of some of their testing at the university. They have footage of the bees coming along and eating. So it kind of looks like a hummingbird. So they have the solution. Bees are going to open and starting to feed off of that. And so I just looked this morning to see if it's anything out being offered for sale yet, and not yet. They still have to go through some regulatory, they have to pass some tests on regulation of this. So I'm not sure where they are in that section. I think so, the reishi, yeah. I think that was, at least that's one of them that they were testing. That's the last I heard. I don't know if they've tested others, but reishi is pretty powerful fungus for human health too. So yeah. So I think that with different people, I think it's going to take an interdisciplinary effort to really solve this problem and make sure that our bee population is strong again and ready to go. And cutting back on pesticides and ideas like this. Our nutrition is huge. If we can do preventative health, eat well, we tend to be strong enough to deal with potential illnesses that might come along. Look for that. I did a search, and of course Amazon's website popped up, but when I clicked there, it wasn't this. It was something else. And so I don't think it's for sale. I couldn't find it for sale anywhere yet, but hopefully soon. Okay. But bees aren't the only players in the game for pollination. And so beetles are probably one of the earliest pollinators in evolutionary timeline. And they have different favorite smells, I guess, than most of us. They tend to like really spicy, yeasty smells. And so if you ever smell flowers that are like that, chances are it could be beetle pollinated. Often you'll see plants will offer their flowers a little lower down to the ground in case they're mostly are, a lot of beetles crawl around. They don't always fly. And so there's those ideas to think about. The plants usually don't, they usually don't go way out in terms of a visual. They're not as flashy compared to like if you're a hummingbird or bee pollinated, because we think beetles don't have the greatest vision. So they tend to be light in color, like a dull, pale off-white or something like that, tan. But they have a very strong, spicy or yeasty odor. So it seems like they're relying more on the odor than the visual cue. And thinking about moths and that are active during the day, there's plenty of nocturnal, we'll talk about those later, or butterflies during the day. Then we tend to see flowers similar to what bees like, but we think butterflies are also connected to what we call red. They will pick up as well the red color of the flowers, whereas bees don't seem to do that. If you've ever looked at butterfly mouth or moth mouth, they tend to have a proboscis that can be long and slender, and so flowers often will be co-evolved to allow for, they'll kind of tuck the nectar down deeper into the flower so that the proboscis can reach it, but other pollinators can't. And so again, very interesting flower design to really, make sure that I want this particular butterfly to come pollinate me because we co-evolved and it's successful to get the pollination to occur. So, for example, this is a good one where you can see the very long flower parts here. And so, so the nectar tends to be tucked down in those longer stretches because the mouth parts can reach them. But then, like a bee would have a hard time. A bee wouldn't be able to get to that nectar down there. So very interesting design. And then if you are a moth at night, and well, it's going to be dark, dark background. So it makes sense to have white flowers, something that will really pop against a black background. And for nocturnal pollinators, there's moths, beetles, flies, bats are our favorites for flying around at night. And most nocturnal pollinators tend to have a really good sense of smell, and the flowers will tend to be giving off scent only at night, not during the day. They'll give off scent at night, and pretty powerful scent, like pretty strong. I had a night blooming plant in my living room that took a while to mature before it would ever form flowers. It's actually the snake plant. If you've ever had a snake plant long enough, it finally flowered for me, and I had it since it was, since I propagated it. So then I must have had it 8-10 years, and it finally decided to flower. And beautiful little flower spike with rather dainty flowers, but the really strong smell, like very powerful smell. So, and but it's only in the morning and so this idea of timing is pretty smart, you know, when you think about it, like if you're going to make all that scent, all those scent molecules, just do it at night because that's when your pollinators out and about and hopefully will be moving from flower to flower. Okay, so nocturnal pollination, bright, something that can pop against the dark background, very strong odors, and the odors would be, you know, specific to the pollinator. We might not particularly care for the odor, but here's a lovely image of bat. And so with bats, you can see this flower is really beefed up, the strength of the tissue here. And so if that bat decides to land, you don't want that flower to just break. And so of all the flowers, of all the pollinators, it's typically the bat pollinated flowers that are like the most robust. And they really got to strengthen up their stock, make sure that when bat lands, it would not be broken. And so bats are actually really important pollinators, and I get so frustrated with the bad rap that bats get in the common world. People vilify them, and they are so important. They're fascinating animals, and they unfortunately, you know, Hollywood has given them a bad rap. So I have down in the notes, they are very important for bananas, mangoes, sisal, kapok. You know, those are all mainstream commercial crops that are grown. That's more, you know, south of us, more tropical and subtropical. Still, very, very important. So be kind to bats. Okay, birds. Hummingbirds, we've talked a little bit. Hummingbirds and honey creepers. They tend to be able to see red and yellow quite nicely. We don't think they have a great sense of smell, though. Really good vision, but not so great on the smell. So if you smell these types of flowers, to our nose, we don't really pick up much of anything, but they usually look very beautiful. And again, you have to look at the specific honey creeper or hummingbird, what's the length of their beak, because that flower design will tend to match the length of the beak, as well as the length of their tongue, of how far they can reach down into the flower. And there's even, I can't remember which plant, but there's been some interesting where they can show within just like a generation, plants have adapted the length of their flower because a new pollinator in a certain geographic region of this plant started. It was a different species of hummingbird, and they showed within just like a generation, the flower adapted to that new pollinator. So it can happen very quickly in terms of the plant's ability to adapt to a new pollinator. There's a pretty amazing picture of a really long beak. I think that Sir David Attenborough video we'll ask you to watch. They show one like this where on a windy day, it's like trying to figure out, you know, not get buffeted by the wind, trying to get their mouth or into pretty narrow opening. It was rather humorous. So, but again, you can see the length of the flower where the nectar tucked down. Beautiful red, again, tend to be trumpet shaped where you have that long piece for the nectar to be tucked away. Here's the beautiful bird of paradise flower, really sturdy because the bigger birds that land on it to help pollinate it. So it's really well designed to allow for the birds to sit and take its time for pollination. Then you have really bizarre ones like this one. This is a protea. I think the video shows some of this as well with the tropical. This is actually an inflorescence. Many, many flowers all grouped together, but it looks like one giant but they think it's for birds, that red and yellow combination. And then when you think about rodents, they tend to be attracted to kind of dull flowers, but very strong smells. And again, some of the rodents, especially some of the desert plants, you'll see the flowers are actually tucked down low because the rodents are running around on the sand dunes and so forth, and so they tend to tuck them down a little bit lower. We've already mentioned bats, and so again, the flowers are pretty sturdy, allow land they so desire. And so mammals certainly are involved in pollination. It just depends on the plant species and where they live and how they've co-evolved. So we have this one, the carrion flower. Flower on the left there is, we have a species like that in the greenhouse that actually just flowered this past fall. So it's called the carrion flower. So do you think it smells good? Ugh, no. So we were daring people to go in there and smell it. And luckily, when you walk into the greenhouse, the scent doesn't go across the whole greenhouse, so it's not like you have to endure that while you're working in there. Like I had to get right up snap, and then it's like, oh yeah, it's like rotting flesh, dead, decaying, rotting flesh. But luckily, it didn't waft through the whole greenhouse. So again, pollinators, you tend to see flies crawling around. And Sir David Attenborough talks a little bit about this as well. He'll tell outside of these carrion flowers, their flowers looks like dead flesh. And there's species of carrion flowers, I think, that he talks about where it looks like the flowers grow near seagull groupings where a bunch of seagulls hang out. And when you look at the flower, it looks like a dead seagull's flesh. And so it's amazing how they have adapted to look like the animals around them near a big seagull population. And we don't have this one in the greenhouse, but lots of people do have this in their greenhouse, a corpse flower. There's one, I know at least one greenhouse downstate at a university has a corpse flower, and then they'll put live footage of it when it starts to form the flower. It takes a long time, but then once it starts to form the flower, they usually do live video feed of it. And then eventually it opens, and it takes a long time. And then you don't know precisely when it's going to open, and it doesn't stay open super long. So that's another reason why they video it, because they want to be able to catch it when it's actually blooming. And then orchids are probably the most interesting in terms of how they can do their pollination with their co-evolved pollinators. And so I'm not going to read through each one of these slides, but they're pretty self-explanatory. If you look at some of the strategies that these orchids have in order to, essentially, they want pollen to land on the pollinator and then allow for the pollinator to move on to the next flower and deposit that pollen on the stigma. And so there's different ways of doing it and different flower designs to get them to brush up against the pollen grains. You can see the pollen of Pollinia, the single one is young, more than one that's young. But you can see it just has a sticky pad that will attach right to the pollinator. And you know, they actually say it explodes as the insect is crawling, bumping, it'll like cause this explosion that causes the attachment. Even to the mouth parts, they show how it kind of clamps around the mouth part in order to secure the pollen. And then you can imagine after that happens, it'll go to the next orchid flower and hopefully, you know, brush that pollen against the stigma of the next flower. So amazing. Here they're showing dissected insect clamped on Pollinia. Some really interesting designs. The video footage, you'll see how some of the insects are like trying to brush it off. They're trying to brush it off, but they can't. It's so well stuck on. It's like glued on. It's amazing. And then you have these types of orchids. This is a wasp orchid where the flower design looks like a female wasp body. And it even pumps out scent that is of the female wasp. It's just amazing. And so in that video, you'll see all the male wasps coming along and trying to mate with the female wasp. And as they're trying to do that, they'll get the Pollinia packets stuck to them. Just amazing. So there on the top left is what the flower looks like, and see the wasps are swarming it. Bottom image there. But you know, not only the visual, I mean, it even looks like the hairs on the wasp body, that level of detail, and then it gives off a pheromone of a wasp, female wasp that's ready to mate. It's just a stunning type of mimicry, really, to allow for, and it's essentially trickery. This male wasp won't get anything from this except maybe frustrated and get pollen deposited on it, but it doesn't seem to really provide any reward at all. It's just all deception to the male wasps. So orchids really can take it to the extreme. Here this is a bucket orchid where they have paddle up a bucket filled with fluid that drips in here, so this tracks the insect, and then they'll fall into the bucket, and then they have to crawl through a trap door in order to get out. And as they're doing that, they're going to get hit with the Pollinia packets. And so again, just amazing ornate ways of tricking their poor pollinators. And so here you can see the Pollinia packets. But you can see how, especially on a bright sunny day with the sunlight glinting on that, where certain flies might go, "Ooh, what's this?" And then it's so slippery, they end up falling into the bucket below, and then they have to crawl out in just the right path. And as they do that, they get the pollen stuck to them. Okay, so orchids are like amazing. They're probably top of the list of their creativity. All this coevolutionary back and forth between themselves and the pollinator. All right, we'll stop there. And then on Monday, we'll get into flowers, or fruits, I should say, and looking a little bit at fruit design.